In our last video, we met the Warherd, the most numerous and human-like beastmen in the Beast of Chaos army. They are fast, nimble, and of course, savage. And what we did in that video, we kind of looked at them from the least mutated to the most mutated. And today we're going to continue that trend on another level, because we are diving into the next level of evolution for the Children of Chaos. We're talking about the Warherd. Even more mutated and devolved than their Warherd cousins. They have grown significantly in power and in might. And as such, they have become these living avalanches of muscle and rage. They are more primal, meaning less human-like, and exhibit far more animal qualities than human ones, both in temperament and physicality. Now, similar to the Warherd, they can form these little self-contained herds or beast herds, and they act as a primal, close-knit tribe. However, with the leadership of a good Doombull, who is the leader, chief, and champion, they also become this roving army. And as we think about them in an army-like fashion, we can kind of compare them to the Warherds to get an understanding of what they're like, because they are far less subtle in their tactics and their nuance. Where the Warherd favor speed and ambushing and that kind of aggressive forward nature, the Warherd prefer to just walk right up and cleave you in half. And this is for a few reasons. One is that their mutations prevent that kind of extreme speed and agility, and they're so large they don't hide in ambush the same way that, say, an Ungor can. The second is simply that their culture, the culture of the Warherd, favors great demonstrations of strength and might, and so being out in the open, walking straight up to the enemy, and doing those kinds of debased acts to the enemy general or champions, things like that, is far more treasured in their culture. Doing something terrible out in the open is a trophy in and of itself. Now, as with every faction within the Beasts of Chaos, history is kind of a hard thing, as we described in an earlier video. But some believe that the Warherd were once less mutated than they are now, much more human-like. However, they debased themselves in these dark rituals beneath a herdstone. They would resort to cannibalism as an act of worship. And not just of worship, but also in an attempt to kind of gain the power of those that they killed. But as the kind of power and darkness of chaos swelled up within them, they mutated further, right? They got their wish, they gained strength and became much more deadly in battle, but they also acquired something called the blood greed. This is a terrible curse that gives them an unholy desire for flesh that drives them to even greater acts of violence. It's not about hunger like in a lot of other factions, but the need to kind of desecrate their victims' corpses and devour them. Because of this strength and their ability to destroy and all that stuff like that, all four Chaos Gods love the Warherd. Khorne loves them because, just frankly, of their ability to slaughter so many enemies. And Tzeentch sees their warped and twisted bodies sort of as a trophy, like this is what chaos and change can do for you. It's a great thing. Slaanesh loves how they revel in debauchery and desecration, and Nurgle really adores the mounds and mounds of bodies they leave behind, and all that rotting flesh gives birth to new diseases and decay. Now, just like the Warherd, they don't always assign themselves to a Chaos God. They're generally unaligned, but it is cool to know that you can theme your army dedicated to one, and there is a great reason why each god would want a Warherd of their own. And if the luring and temptation and adulation of a Chaos God isn't enough, there are also more proofs of how terrible they are. For instance, their Herdstone, and we talked before how Herdstones kind of represent really what the Beast Herd is like. Well, their Herdstones tend to be more outrageous than others. They're going to be adorned with these colossal skulls from Gorgons, everyone they've killed in the campaign. Some of them have living sacrifices almost continuously fed into it, and they can be covered in so much flesh and blood that it almost replaces the rock that's holding the Herdstone together with muscle and vein. And others are covered in maws and jaws and screaming skulls that emit a terrible sound for miles around. So it really goes out of its way to point out that the Herdstones represent this Warherd exquisitely. So now transitioning a little bit, we're going to talk about the Bulgors. This is the base unit of any Warherd, and also the most numerous, but that can be deceiving because they're far more rare than, say, an Ungor, for example. Part of that rarity is simply because of how much they have to eat. And of course, they're eating flesh, not just grazing. Because as we discussed before, they are all afflicted with the blood greed, this curse that gives them a strange desire for cannibalism in a way that's just more than food and sustenance. It's kind of a compulsion, a delight that they have. The Bulgor and Warherd often live deeper in the parts of the woods and shadows where most folks don't go. If you see one, you know you've gone too far into the woods. And they tend to stay there in their little primitive tribal culture until a particularly charismatic Doombull rises up and really points them in a direction. He rallies the tribe together, points them in a direction of where food is, and that's when they start moving. They mobilize. They become this ragtag army versus just a tribe that doesn't do much. And realistically, everything else about the Bulgors is pretty simple. They wield massive and crude axes, and they're strong enough when they wield them to cut multiple men in half with a single swipe. And they're big, they're strong, they're mean and aggressive. Moving on to the Doombull, this is the hero, leader, and champion of a warherd. And he leads by brutal example. He's the first into combat, seeks out enemy heroes, and demonstrates his right to lead by vicious acts against whoever he can get his hands on. Remember I said before that they favor these kind of upfront and very easy to detect tactics by just walking up to their enemy, because demonstrating your brutality and debauchery in front of everyone else is very important, so everyone needs to be able to see you, which leads very well into a culture and society where the leader leads by example. And by example, I mean he goes to the leader and rips him apart and begins eating him in the middle of a fight. In addition to size and mutation and might, which are all things we've talked about as far as asserting dominance in the Warherd video, these acts display authority. Because if your leader runs up to the enemy champion, tears him in half, and begins eating him, other Bulgor in the army looks at that and says, I want to do that too. I will let this guy lead me if he lets me do that. And so they follow him. And it's important to know that they also, the Doombull, suffers from the blood greed. So to this sense, he's always seeking out the biggest enemies on the field in the hopes that eating them will give him a portion of their strength. And since he gets the choice cuts and the bigger and better meals, this kind of makes him an alpha male of the warherd. Now the downside to that curse, however, is that this insatiable need, this kind of compulsion to fight this way, and sort of a keen lack of intelligence means that he's not really going to be a primary leader in a Beast of Chaos army. They can always master smaller beast herds, of course, but the larger ones with thousands upon thousands of mixed troops from Warherd, Thunderscorn, Warherd, well, they kind of lose their temperament and their sense of tactics as soon as the blood starts flowing and they feel the need to run straight in and begin devouring things. It makes sense. You can see why things would fall apart very, very quickly. Those larger armies require an even temper and a very tactical mind to be able to wield effectively. Next, we're going to talk about the Gorgons. And what I love is the Battle Tome states 3 very important facts about the Gorgon up front in its entry. And that is that 3 things precede a Gorgon coming to the battlefield. The first one is a terrible smell of curdled blood and saliva. The second thing is the rumble in the earth from its boulder-sized hoofs. And the third thing is the deafening roar as it hurls itself into combat. Now, there's not a ton of lore about the Gorgon or the Cigor, but some believe that it is the sort of final evolution of a warherd. The maximum point of a living being imbued with the raw power of chaos. And their theory is a Bulgor who tends to ingest whatever power of whatever he's eating, well, if he feeds on another Bulgor to satiate that blood greed, his meal of being a dark creature, eating more of that kind of corrupted meat, it just amplifies the issue and mutates him more. They grow aggressively and become a tower of flesh. And they become so bestial, so devolved, that they no longer can be commanded really and truly as part of an army. They're more just pointed in a direction to go eat something. And it requires the strongest alpha beasts of the warherd to be able to point them in that direction. Now, that being said, they might sound like a liability, but they really are invaluable in combat for their sheer strength and brutality, matched only, of course, by their hunger. And the last unit in this section are the Cigors, and the Cigors are very much like the Gorgon, Bulgors who feasted on a Beast of Chaos unit, and their growth kind of went into overdrive. However, what they were feasting on was not necessarily all Bulgors, but at some point they started eating Great Bray Shaman. So this infused them not only with chaos power just by eating something that's corrupted by whatever force is making the Beast of Chaos, but also kind of infused with the arcane because they are wizards, Great Bray Shaman. And their mutation took kind of a strange turn because as a wizard casts spells, these Cigor can eat it right out of the sky. Like they can just literally chomp down the magic. When they do so, it hurts the person casting the spell and they are able to heal themselves. And the reason they can do this is because that mutation has affected their sight. You'll notice the Cigor has obviously one eye in the dead center of its skull. Well, truth of the matter is, that eye is perfectly blind because their unique diet of Great Bray Shaman has given them something called ghost sight, which is the ability to perceive arcane magics and energies around them. The two eyes meld over time into one on the forehead, and they become the doom of wizards on the battlefield. Which is interesting because they kind of mutated to fit what they were eating, like the predator evolved to become better at eating its prey. And a side note here is that with this ghost sight, they're able to look and see places of arcane power. And while they kind of deter away from magical wards and things like that, they often run up and rip off a piece of those places of arcane power and hurl them at the enemy. This actually explains the giant boulder with all kinds of cool magic symbols all over it that they use on the model. So as I end all of these videos, why are these units cool? What makes Warherd stand out? Well, frankly, similar to the other sub-faction we covered already, Warherd, I love what they bring to the army. If the whole faction was these fast, aggressive outflankers, it's very one-dimensional, but the ability to bring in these heavy hitters with these massive axes and rend and ability to soak up damage, it makes them so different, but in a very complementary way. I also love the idea of this mutation that makes them what they are as an ongoing process. That some Warherd long ago warped into a Bulgor, and that the Bulgors are warping into Gorgons and Cigors, this kind of evolutionary chain where it's just dark magic infusing within them. And as we explored with the Flesh Eater Courts, totally by coincidence, is that I love the idea of what you eat affects you. In the Flesh Eater Courts, we talked about how eating the Zombie Dragon and the Terrorgeist is manipulated to kind of bring out mutations within the units in that army. And it's not as direct of a mutation, like, say, eating a Terrorgeist and then gaining the ability to scream like one. That doesn't really happen here with the Warherd, but it does give them power of what they kill. And what's fascinating is when that kind of hunger and that ability to mutate and evolve turns in on itself, meaning the Gorgon and the Cigor, when they start eating their own, it amplifies and things get out of hand very quickly. So you get this constant evolution fueled by the blood greed. So friends, that is all there is about the Warherd. Just a few units today, but they are very fascinating, and I absolutely love the models for them. I know my buddy Mark at Rerolling Ones loves his Warherd as well, and if you have a moment you want to see what the new rules are like, they have a battle report up featuring them, where it's an entire army made of nothing but Warherd. And I'll put a link to that in the description down below. We're going to continue with a few more videos on the Beasts of Chaos starting next week. We're going to dive right back in with the Thunderscorn. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and if you know someone who's interested in this army, please go ahead and share this video with them. I appreciate whenever my videos are shared, and it means so much to me, so thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.